My life with Anastasia had always felt like a carefully composed symphony, a harmonious blend of love, ambition, and shared dreams. We built a beautiful home, filled it with laughter and the comforting aroma of her baking. Anastasia, with her radiant smile and infectious enthusiasm, was the sun around which my world revolved. I, Mark, a man driven by logic and order, found perfect equilibrium in her warmth and spontaneity. Our careers were flourishing. I, a successful architect, she, a celebrated artist. We were the envy of our friends, a picture-perfect couple. Or so I thought. Our 10th anniversary was approaching, a milestone I was eagerly anticipating. I planned a surprise trip to Venice, a city she had always dreamt of visiting. I envisioned us strolling hand in hand along the canals, indulging in romantic gondola rides, and reaffirming the vows we had made a decade ago. I had even commissioned a special piece of jewelry, a delicate necklace with a pendant shaped like a gondola, a symbol of our upcoming adventure. I was brimming with excitement, eager to see the joy in her eyes when I unveiled my plans. I believed, with unwavering certainty, that our love was a fortress, impenetrable and everlasting. I was, it turned out, tragically mistaken. The first discordant note in our symphony, the subtle tremor that would eventually shatter the foundations of our seemingly perfect world, came in the form of a misplaced scarf. A silk scarf, a shade of crimson I had never seen before, tucked deep within the pocket of her coat. It wasn't mine, and it certainly wasn't something Anastasia would have bought for herself. Her taste leaned towards softer, more pastel hues. I found it on a Tuesday evening, while preparing her coat for the cleaners. My heart skipped a beat, a flicker of unease igniting within me. I dismissed it as quickly as it arose. Perhaps it belonged to a friend, or maybe she had picked it up by mistake at a gallery opening. I told myself not to be foolish, not to let such a trivial thing cloud my happiness. But the seed of doubt had been planted, a tiny, insidious weed that would soon sprout and choke the life out of our idyllic existence. The crimson scarf, though seemingly insignificant, became a persistent, nagging presence in the back of my mind. It was a silent question mark hanging over our seemingly perfect life. I tried to ignore it, to push it aside as a fleeting anomaly, but it kept resurfacing, a phantom image flickering at the edge of my perception. I started paying closer attention to Anastasia's routines, her habits, her interactions with others. I wasn't consciously looking for anything specific, but I was hyper-aware, my senses heightened, searching for any other discordant notes in our carefully orchestrated symphony. She started staying late at the gallery more often, citing upcoming exhibitions and demanding deadlines. I didn't question it at first. Anastasia was a dedicated artist, and I admired her passion and commitment to her work. But the late nights became a regular occurrence, stretching into weeks, then months. She would come home exhausted, her smile strained, her eyes distant. Our conversations dwindled, replaced by perfunctory exchanges about our day. The warmth and intimacy that had once defined our relationship began to cool, replaced by a growing sense of unease. I noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. She seemed preoccupied, lost in her own thoughts. She was less affectionate, less spontaneous. The laughter that had once filled our home felt muted, replaced by an unsettling quiet. She started taking her phone with her everywhere, even to the bathroom, something she had never done before. She would flinch if I came too close while she was using it, quickly turning the screen away. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that I was overreacting. But the feeling persisted, a cold, hard knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The Venice trip, once a symbol of our unwavering love, now felt like a distant dream, a reminder of the happiness that seemed to be slipping away. I still hadn't mentioned it to Anastasia. I hesitated, unsure if I could bear the disappointment if she wasn't as enthusiastic as I had hoped. The crimson scarf, the late nights, the hushed phone calls, the distant gaze. They were all pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve, but I knew, deep down, that I had to. The symphony was faltering, the harmony disrupted, and I feared the crescendo would be a shattering discord. The truth, when it finally arrived, was a brutal, visceral blow. It wasn't a gradual unraveling. It was a sudden, violent tear in the fabric of my reality. I had decided to surprise Anastasia at the gallery one evening, a spontaneous gesture to rekindle the spark I felt was fading between us. I brought her flowers, her favorite lilies, and a bottle of champagne, hoping to whisk her away for a romantic dinner. I arrived at the gallery just as the evening's exhibition was closing. The lights were dimmed, and most of the staff had already left. I could hear Anastasia's voice coming from a back room, a low, intimate murmur. I smiled, anticipating her surprise, and walked towards the sound. What I saw in that dimly lit room shattered my world. Anastasia wasn't alone. She was with another man, a man I vaguely recognized as a fellow artist, someone she had met at a recent exhibition. They were close, intimately so, their bodies intertwined. His hand was caressing her cheek, and she was looking at him with a tenderness, a vulnerability I hadn't seen in her eyes for years. The lilies slipped from my grasp, falling to the floor with a soft thud, a sound that seemed to amplify the silence in the room. Anastasia turned, her eyes widening in shock as she saw me standing there. The bouquet at my feet, the champagne bottle rolling across the floor. The color drained from her face, replaced by a look of fear and guilt. The man with her straightened up, a look of awkwardness and apprehension crossing his features. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream, I didn't shout. I simply stared at them, my mind numb, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The world I had known, the world I had believed in, crumbled before my eyes. The symphony I had cherished was over, the music silenced by a jarring, discordant note of betrayal. I turned and walked away, leaving the lilies and the champagne behind, a symbolic offering at the altar of a love that was no more. I walked out of the gallery and into the night, the cool air doing nothing to quell the burning rage that was beginning to ignite within me. The crimson scarf, the late nights, the hushed phone calls, they all clicked into place, forming a picture of deception and infidelity. The pain was excruciating, a physical ache that resonated through my entire being. But beneath the pain, a darker emotion was stirring, a cold, calculated desire for revenge. The man I had been, the loving husband, the gentle soul was gone. In his place was a man consumed by anger, a man determined to make Anastasia pay for what she had done. The initial shock and gut-wrenching pain of discovering Anastasia's infidelity gradually morphed into a cold, simmering rage. It wasn't the fiery, explosive kind of anger that demanded immediate action. It was a slow-burning resentment that settled deep within my bones, fueling a quiet determination for retribution. I didn't confront Anastasia. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply retreated, withdrawing into myself, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me, a small, foolish part, still clung to the memory of our past happiness, the illusion of our perfect life. But that part was quickly being consumed by the burning desire for revenge. I knew I couldn't forgive her. I couldn't forget. The image of her in another man's arms was seared into my brain, a constant reminder of her betrayal. Sleep offered no respite. My nights were plagued by vivid, torturous replays of that scene in the gallery, each time more vivid, more agonizing than the last. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the taste of bitterness in my mouth. I continued my daily routines, going to work, interacting with colleagues, but it was all a facade. Inside, I was a hollow shell, a man consumed by a single, all-encompassing thought: how to make Anastasia pay for what she had done. I knew I couldn't resort to anything impulsive or rash. My revenge had to be calculated, precise, and devastating. It had to be a slow, methodical dismantling of her life, a systematic destruction of everything she held dear. I started by observing her, studying her habits, her routines, her interactions with others. I became a silent observer in my own life, a ghost in my own home. I watched her as she went about her day, her face a mask of normalcy, as if nothing had happened. The ease with which she carried on, the apparent lack of remorse, only fueled my anger. I started keeping a journal, a meticulous record of her activities, her phone calls, her appointments. I needed information, ammunition to use against her. I knew I had to be patient to play the long game. My revenge wouldn't be a single act of vengeance. It would be a carefully orchestrated symphony of pain, a slow, deliberate crescendo of suffering. The man I had been, the trusting, loving husband, was dead. He had been replaced by a man driven by a cold, unwavering purpose, to make Anastasia's life as miserable as she had made mine. My journal became my obsession. Every detail of Anastasia's life was meticulously documented. Every phone call logged. Every meeting noted. Every late night at the gallery recorded. I installed a discreet tracking app on her phone, allowing me to monitor her movements, to know where she was at all times. The more I delved into her life, the more I realized the extent of her deception. It wasn't just the artist from the gallery. There were others. A client she had been working with on a private commission, a charming, silver-tongued man who frequented her gallery, a childhood friend, someone I had welcomed into our home, someone I had considered a friend, even the owner of the local cafe where she often went for her morning coffee. Each discovery was like a fresh wound, a brutal reminder of her betrayal. The rage that simmered within me intensified, fueled by the knowledge that her infidelity was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a pattern of deceit. I felt a profound sense of violation, not just of our marriage vows, but of my trust, my faith in her. The woman I had loved, the woman I had shared my life with, was a stranger, a chameleon who had expertly disguised her true nature. The journal was no longer just a tool for gathering information. It became a confessional, a place where I could pour out my anger, my pain, my hatred. I wrote about the disgust I felt, the revulsion at the thought of her with these other men. I wrote about the fantasies of revenge that consumed me, the elaborate scenarios of retribution that played out in my mind. I knew I couldn't act on these fantasies, not yet. I needed to be patient, to gather more evidence, to build a case against her that was irrefutable. I needed to make her pay, not just for the pain she had caused me, but for the sheer audacity of her deception. The journal became my constant companion, a dark mirror reflecting the transformation I was undergoing. The man I had been, the man who believed in love and loyalty, was fading away, replaced by a creature of vengeance, a man consumed by a single, all-consuming purpose. My plan for revenge began to take shape, a carefully constructed edifice built on the foundations of my anger and pain. It wouldn't be a single act of retribution, a quick and dirty strike. It would be a slow, methodical dismantling of Anastasia's life, a systematic destruction of everything she held dear. I started with her social circle, the friends and acquaintances who formed the tapestry of her life outside our home. I subtly sowed seeds of doubt, planting whispers of her infidelity, veiled hints of her deceit. I exploited existing tensions, magnifying minor disagreements, turning friends against each other, creating a web of suspicion and mistrust. I used social media to my advantage, creating anonymous profiles to spread rumors, to drop hints, to fuel the gossip mill. I knew how much Anastasia valued her social standing, her reputation as a successful artist and a charming socialite. I was determined to strip her of that, to expose her true nature to the world. I targeted her closest friends, the ones she confided in, the ones who held her in high esteem. I manipulated conversations, subtly suggesting that she was taking advantage of their kindness, that she was using them for her own gain. I planted seeds of jealousy, hinting at her flirtatious behavior, her penchant for attention. Slowly, subtly, the tide began to turn. Friends started distancing themselves, their warmth replaced by coolness, their trust by suspicion. Invitations dwindled, phone calls went unanswered, social gatherings became strained and awkward. Anastasia, oblivious to my machinations, attributed it to stress, to the pressures of her work. She confided in me, her voice laced with confusion and hurt. I listened, offering empty words of comfort, all the while reveling in the success of my plan. The isolation was gradual but relentless. The vibrant social butterfly, the life of the party, was slowly being suffocated. Her wings clipped, her spirit crushed. I watched it all unfold, a cold satisfaction growing within me. It was just the beginning, the first movement in my symphony of revenge. The foundation had been laid, the ground prepared for the next stage of my plan, the dismantling of her professional life. With Anastasia's social circle in disarray, I turned my attention to her professional life, the other pillars supporting her carefully constructed world. She was a respected artist, her work displayed in prominent galleries, her name whispered with admiration in art circles. I was determined to bring her down, to expose her as the fraud I believed her to be. I started subtly, planting doubts about her artistic integrity. I anonymously contacted art critics, whispering suggestions of plagiarism, hinting at unethical practices. I leaked information about her past, exaggerating minor indiscretions, casting shadows on her character. I then focused on her clients, the wealthy patrons who commissioned her work, who admired her talent. I contacted them anonymously, revealing her infidelities, painting her as a manipulative and untrustworthy individual. I knew that, in the world of art, reputation was everything. A stain on her character would be a stain on her art. The effects were gradual but devastating. Clients began to withdraw their support, commissions were cancelled, exhibitions postponed. The whispers grew louder, the doubts more pronounced. Anastasia's once bright star began to dim, her name tarnished by the rumors and innuendo I had carefully cultivated. I watched her struggle, her confidence waning, her enthusiasm replaced by a growing sense of anxiety. She tried to dismiss the rumors, to attribute them to jealousy and spite, but the evidence was mounting against her. The cancellations, the postponements, the cold shoulders from her colleagues. They all spoke a language she couldn't ignore. I saw the fear in her eyes, the desperation in her voice as she tried to salvage her career. It fueled my determination, strengthened my resolve. I wouldn't stop until she was completely ruined, until her name was synonymous with deceit and betrayal. The dismantling of her professional life was a slow, agonizing process, a carefully orchestrated downfall. It was the second movement in my symphony of revenge, a somber andante that set the stage for the more dramatic movements to come. Having successfully isolated Anastasia socially and professionally, I turned my attention to the men she had betrayed me with. These men, who had so carelessly taken what was mine, who had reveled in her deception, would not escape my wrath. I started by gathering information about them, their lives, their relationships, their vulnerabilities. I used social media, public records, and even private investigators to build a detailed profile of each one. I learned about their families, their careers, their secrets. My strategy was different for each man, tailored to their individual circumstances. For some, it was a simple matter of exposing their affair to their partners, wives, or girlfriends. I sent anonymous emails, letters, and even text messages, revealing the details of their trysts with Anastasia, the dates, the locations, the intimate details. For others, the approach was more subtle. I sowed seeds of discord in their relationships, planting suspicions, fueling arguments, creating a climate of mistrust and resentment. I exploited their weaknesses, their insecurities, their fears. One of the men, the gallery owner, was particularly vulnerable. He was married, with a young family, and his reputation was paramount to his business. I leaked information about his affair to the local press, anonymously of course, ensuring that the scandal would be widely publicized. The resulting fallout was swift and devastating. His wife left him, taking their children with her. His business suffered, clients withdrawing their support, his reputation in tatters. Another man, the childhood friend, was deeply religious, his faith a central part of his life. I anonymously contacted his church, revealing his infidelity, painting him as a hypocrite and a sinner. The shame and ostracism he faced from his community were unbearable, his life irrevocably altered. I watched as each man's world crumbled, their lives unraveling in the wake of my actions. It wasn't simply about revenge. It was about justice, about restoring the balance that had been so brutally disrupted. These men had played a part in my downfall, and they would pay the price. The manipulation of these men was the third movement in my symphony of revenge, a scherzo, a dark and twisted dance of deceit and destruction. It was a prelude to the final, most devastating movement, the one that would bring Anastasia to her knees. With Anastasia's social and professional life in ruins, and her lovers facing their own personal downfalls, I turned my attention to our finances. We had always shared everything, our accounts intertwined, our assets jointly owned. It was time to sever those ties, to leave her financially vulnerable, to add another layer of pain to her already crumbling world. I started subtly, shifting funds to separate accounts, creating a financial cushion for myself. I invested in assets that were solely in my name, ensuring that she would have no claim to them. I then began to systematically drain our joint accounts, making small, inconspicuous withdrawals, transferring money to offshore accounts, investing in ventures that were unlikely to yield immediate returns. I knew Anastasia wasn't particularly financially savvy. She trusted me implicitly with our finances, leaving me to manage the day-to-day affairs. This made my task easier, allowing me to manipulate our finances without raising suspicion. I also started making extravagant purchases, buying expensive items that I knew she would disapprove of, things that would drain our resources further. I booked lavish holidays, purchased designer clothes, and indulged in expensive hobbies. I wanted her to see that I was moving on, that I was no longer bound by the constraints of our shared life. The effect on Anastasia was gradual but noticeable. She started to question our finances, expressing concern about the dwindling funds, the unexplained expenses. I dismissed her concerns, attributing them to her stress, her preoccupation with her failing career. I gaslight her, making her doubt her own perceptions, her own sanity. As our financial situation worsened, the tension in our home grew palpable. Arguments erupted over unpaid bills, over missed payments, over the general lack of funds. Anastasia's anxiety increased, her sense of security shattered. She was losing everything, her world collapsing around her, and she had no one to turn to. The financial manipulation was the fourth movement in my symphony of revenge, a slow, mournful adagio, a lament for the life we had once shared, a life that I was now systematically destroying. It was a prelude to the final, most public act of my revenge, the one that would expose her to the world, leaving her with nothing but shame and regret. The time had come to take my revenge to a new level, to expose Anastasia's betrayal to the world, to strip her of the last vestiges of her carefully constructed image. I decided to create an anonymous blog, a digital platform where I could reveal the truth about her infidelity, her deceit, her lies. I chose the name The Unveiled Muse for the blog, a sardonic nod to her artistic persona. I started by posting cryptic entries, veiled references to her affairs, hints of her double life. I used pseudonyms for the men involved, but I left enough clues for those who knew her to recognize them. I described the encounters in vivid detail, the stolen moments, the secret rendezvous, the whispered promises. I revealed the lies she had told, the excuses she had made, the manipulations she had employed. I painted a picture of a woman consumed by lust, driven by selfish desires, devoid of any moral compass. The blog gained traction quickly, the anonymous entries fueling the gossip mill, the whispers turning into shouts. People were fascinated by the salacious details, the intimate revelations. They devoured each new post, eager for more, their curiosity piqued by the mystery surrounding the identity of the unveiled muse. Anastasia, initially oblivious to the blog, soon became aware of its existence. Friends and acquaintances, unable to contain their curiosity, confronted her with the details, the accusations, the innuendo. She denied it at first, dismissing it as malicious gossip, but the evidence was overwhelming. The blog posts were too specific, too detailed, to be dismissed as mere fabrication. They described incidents, conversations, even intimate details that only someone with intimate knowledge of her life could have known. The realization that someone was watching her, documenting her every move, sent a chill down her spine. The blog became a public forum for her humiliation, a digital pillory where she was exposed to the world, stripped bare of her dignity, her reputation shattered beyond repair. The shame was unbearable, the whispers relentless. She became a pariah, ostracized by her community, shunned by her former friends. The blog was the fifth movement in my symphony of revenge, a rondo, a relentless cycle of revelations and accusations, a public spectacle of her downfall. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, a testament to my determination to make her pay for her betrayal. The blog had achieved its purpose, stripping Anastasia bare in the eyes of the world. But my thirst for revenge was far from quenched. I wanted more, something tangible, something that would leave her with lasting consequences. I decided to frame her for a crime, a carefully orchestrated act of deception that would land her in legal trouble. I chose embezzlement as the crime, exploiting her position at the gallery and her lack of financial acumen. I started by subtly manipulating the gallery's accounts, creating false invoices, forging documents, and diverting funds to a secret account I had set up in her name. I then anonymously contacted the gallery's board of directors, alerting them to the financial irregularities, pointing the finger squarely at Anastasia. I provided them with fabricated evidence, doctored documents, and misleading information, creating a convincing case against her. The board, already suspicious of Anastasia due to the rumors circulating about her personal life, launched an investigation. The evidence I had planted was irrefutable, the financial trail leading directly to her. She was suspended from her position, her reputation further tarnished, her career hanging by a thread. The police were called in, and a criminal investigation was launched. Anastasia, bewildered and terrified, proclaimed her innocence, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. The evidence was stacked against her, the financial trail seemingly irrefutable. She was arrested, charged with embezzlement, and released on bail, pending trial. The media had a field day, the unveiled Muse scandal taking a new, dramatic turn. Anastasia's face was plastered across newspapers and television screens, her name synonymous with fraud and deceit. She became a social outcast, shunned by her community, her life in ruins. The framing was the sixth movement in my symphony of revenge, a dramatic allegro, a swift and decisive blow that brought her world crashing down. It was a masterstroke of manipulation, a testament to my cold-blooded determination to make her pay for her betrayal. As my plan unfolded, as Anastasia's life spiraled into chaos, I found myself changing. The man I had been, the loving husband, the compassionate friend, was fading away, replaced by a stranger, a man consumed by vengeance. I had become a master manipulator, a puppeteer pulling the strings of Anastasia's life, orchestrating her downfall with cold, calculated precision. I reveled in her suffering, her pain fueling my own twisted sense of satisfaction. My days were spent monitoring her every move, tracking her whereabouts, reading the news reports about her case, and savoring the comments on the blog. I had become obsessed, my life revolving around her destruction. My nights were filled with dark fantasies, visions of her humiliation, her despair, her utter ruin. I imagined her languishing in prison, stripped of her freedom, her dignity, her identity. I pictured her begging for mercy, pleading for forgiveness, but I felt no compassion, no remorse. The transformation was both exhilarating and terrifying. I felt a sense of power, a control I had never experienced before. But I also felt a growing emptiness, a void where my love for Anastasia had once been. The man I had become was a stranger to me, a man I barely recognized. My friends and family noticed the change, their concern growing with each passing day. They tried to intervene, to reason with me, to pull me back from the brink. But their words fell on deaf ears. I was too far gone, consumed by my own darkness, my own twisted sense of justice. I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The man I had been was dead, replaced by a creature of vengeance, a man driven by a single, all-consuming purpose, to destroy Anastasia. This transformation was the seventh movement in my symphony of revenge, a dark and turbulent presto, a reflection of the inner turmoil that was consuming me. It was a prelude to the final act, the culmination of my plan, the moment when Anastasia would face the full consequences of her betrayal. The world closed in on Anastasia. The combined weight of social ostracism, professional ruin, and criminal charges proved too much to bear. The vibrant, confident woman I had fallen in love with was gone, replaced by a shadow of her former self. The legal proceedings dragged on, each hearing a public spectacle of her humiliation. The evidence I had so carefully planted was presented, painting a damning picture of guilt. Anastasia's lawyer, a court-appointed public defender, fought valiantly, but the tide was against them. The media frenzy continued unabated, the unveiled Muse scandal providing endless fodder for gossip columns and news reports. Anastasia's every move was scrutinized, her every word dissected, her every expression analyzed. She became a symbol of infidelity and deceit, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. Her friends, the ones who had not completely abandoned her, offered what support they could, but their voices were drowned out by the chorus of condemnation. Her family, ashamed and heartbroken, distanced themselves, unable to cope with the public shame. Anastasia's once bright world had shrunk to the confines of her small apartment, the walls closing in, the silence deafening. She spent her days staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring, hoping for a voice of support, a word of comfort. But the calls never came. Her nights were filled with nightmares, visions of prison bars, courtroom dramas, and accusing faces. Sleep offered no escape, only a deeper descent into despair. She lost weight, her once radiant skin now pale and drawn, her eyes hollow and haunted. The isolation was complete, the loneliness unbearable. She had become a ghost, a specter haunting the ruins of her own life. The woman who had once embraced life with such passion and joy was now a prisoner of her own circumstances, trapped in a nightmare of my making. This was the 8th movement in my symphony of revenge, a tragic largo, a slow and mournful lament for the woman she had been, the woman I had destroyed. It was a prelude to the final act, the culmination of my plan, the moment when the curtain would fall, and the consequences of her betrayal would be fully realized. The trial was a foregone conclusion. The evidence, though fabricated, was compelling, and Anastasia's defense was weak. The jury, swayed by the media frenzy and the prevailing public opinion, delivered a guilty verdict. Anastasia stood in the dock, her face pale, her body trembling, as the judge read out the sentence. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a harsh punishment for a crime she didn't commit. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs, but Anastasia remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. As she was led away, her hands cuffed, her head bowed, I watched from the gallery, a sense of cold satisfaction washing over me. My plan had worked. Anastasia was paying the price for her betrayal, her life irrevocably shattered. The news of her conviction spread like wildfire, the final nail in the coffin of her reputation. The blog, the unveiled Muse, exploded with comments, a chorus of condemnation and schadenfreude. Anastasia was the villain, the adulteress, the criminal. I was the victim, the wronged husband, the dispenser of justice. But as the dust settled, as the initial euphoria of victory faded, a strange emptiness began to creep in. I had achieved my revenge, but the satisfaction was hollow. The woman I had loved, the woman I had shared my life with, was gone, replaced by a criminal, a pariah, a ghost. I had destroyed her, but in doing so, I had also destroyed a part of myself. The love, the compassion, the empathy, they were all gone, replaced by bitterness, resentment, and a profound sense of loss. I had won the battle, but I was losing the war. The price of my revenge was far greater than I had ever imagined. It was a Pyrrhic victory, a triumph that had left me empty and alone. This was the 9th movement in my symphony of revenge, a somber andante, a reflection of the hollowness of my victory, the emptiness of my heart. It was a prelude to the final act, the denouement, the moment of reckoning, when I would have to face the consequences of my actions, the true cost of my revenge.